The Chatham High School students who are here today watching Democracy Now! This is democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. 2011 is shaping up to be an historic year in the Middle East and North Africa, with the populist uprisings in Tunisia, then Egypt, and the massive street protests that are occurring across the region. Libya, Bahrain, Iran are the latest countries to be hit by a wave of popular protests. Demonstrations erupted in the Libyan city of Benghazi overnight. Online reports indicate 2 people died, many were injured. A nationwide day of protests is set to take place in Libya tomorrow. In Bahrain, anti-government protests have entered their 3rd day. Bahrain is the home of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, making it a key strategic ally for the United States. Meanwhile, in Iran, tens of thousands of people took to the streets Monday in the largest protest since the pro-democracy demonstrations of 2009. At least 2 protesters died. Several were injured as security forces used tear gas, pepper spray, batons in an attempt to disperse the crowds. Many protesters were detained. Iranian lawmakers denounced Monday's protests and called for the execution of the 2 top opposition leaders and former presidential candidates, Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi. On Tuesday, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said the opposition protests are, quote, going nowhere, and promised to punish their organizers. Barack Obama responded critically to the Iranian government's position.
I find it ironic that you've got the Iranian regime pretending to celebrate what happened in Egypt, when in fact they have acted in direct contrast to what happened in Egypt by gunning down and beating people who were trying to express themselves peacefully in Iran.
While President Obama openly criticized Iran as cracking down on protesters, he said nothing critical about Bahrain, a close U.S. ally, where 2 protesters have been killed since Monday. To discuss the situation in Iran and Bahrain, we are joined by Faraz Sanei. He is a researcher at Human Rights Watch who's been closely monitoring events in both countries. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Faraz. Explain first Bahrain.
As you mentioned, there were protests on Monday called for by the youth of Bahrain, most of whom are most of the people who are believed to have called for the protests are Shia, although there are also Sunnis who have joined in the protests, and they called for a day of rage. And this is unfortunately nothing new in Bahrain. We have actually seen over the past several years lots of disturbances and riots, but it hasn't gotten a lot of media attention. And because of the recent developments in the Middle East, I think the youth in Bahrain, as in many other places, have been, really, it's been uplifting for them to see what has happened in Egypt, what has happened in Tunisia, and they have called for a day of rage, or they called for a day of rage. It became viral on Facebook, on social media sites, on Twitter. A lot of the opposition groups, actually, in Bahrain didn't initially support or come out in support of the Day of Rage protests in Bahrain, although they have lots of problems with the government, lots of grievances. But we saw that, in fact, people did come out, people did demonstrate on Monday, and unfortunately, Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations have documented a violent crackdown on protests, what we believe for the most part to be peaceful protests by the police, and an excessive use of force, which unfortunately has left 2 demonstrators dead.
What about this issue of President Obama speaking out very clearly about cracking down on protests in Iran, but Bahrain, which is a U.S. military ally, and we have a base there, not having the same kind of comments?
It's a good issue that you bring up. I mean, Human Rights Watch has been concerned about the fact that things in Bahrain have actually gotten quite worse in the past year or 2. In August and in September of last year, there were 23 individuals who were arrested and are now being put on trial for terrorism charges. And we believe that a lot of it has to do with them actually speaking out against the government. There has been really a rollback of reform in Bahrain that we have seen. But we don't see a lot of public commentary from the U.S. State Department and from the U.S. government criticizing the Bahraini government. And we have been rather disappointed that we haven't seen this. We believe that perhaps in private, the U.S. government is having talks with the Bahraini government, especially regarding the 23 individuals who were arrested, regarding the crackdown on peaceful protesters, and other issues in Bahrain. But again, we are asking for a more public position from the U.S. government because they actually have a lot of sway in terms of what happens in Bahrain. They don't have that necessarily in Iran.
What is the U.S. presence there?
As you mentioned, the U.S. Fifth Fleet is there. The U.S. government, and actually not only the U.S. government, but also the U.S.'s European allies have strong links, military links with the government of Bahrain. Bahrain is considered to be a very, very close ally and an important ally in the Persian Gulf region to the United States and its allies.